How's it going, everybody? So welcome to the next Free Black Women's Library 2021 Reading Challenge video series for the month of May. My name is Shawna Shipley-Gates, and I'm a second-year PhD student at KU in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies department. And so for this month, the category that I chose is a book by a revolutionary community activist, political organizer, or abolitionist. And so I'm going to start out by introducing the author, or the book first and then the author. So the book I chose for that category is Unapologetic, a Black, Queer, and Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements by Charlene Carruthers. And I will say, first and foremost, I was thoroughly, just so invested into this book. There's so many gems that I think a lot of us who are radical Black feminists, we need to, have this on our bookshelf. So I had a great time reading it. Okay, so about the author. So on her short bio on her website, charlenecarruthers.com, I got it from there. So she starts out with the quote, "Yes, I am Black. Yes, I am a lesbian. Yes, I am queer. Yes, I'm a woman, and my eyes are squarely centered on Black liberation." So Charlene Carruthers is a political strategist, cultural worker, and PhD student in the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University. A practitioner of telling more complete stories, her research includes interrogating historical conjunctures of Black freedom-making, post-emancipation, and decolonial revolution, Black governance, Black feminist, and queer theory. Her work spans more than 15 years of community organizing across racial, gender, and economic justice movements. As the founding national director of Black Youth Project 100, known as BYP 100, she has worked alongside hundreds of young Black activists to build a national base of activists in a member-led organization of Black 18 to 35-year-olds dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. And she is the author of this book, and it is available in English and Spanish. All right, so let's get into it. So chapter 1 was titled All of Us or None of Us. And she defines what a Black queer feminist lens is. So that's what I'm going to read from here. As I define it, the Black queer feminist, or BQF, lens is a political practice and theory, based in Black feminist and LGBTQ traditions and knowledge, through which people and groups see to bring their full selves in the process of dismantling all systems of oppression. By using this lens, we are aided in creating alternatives of self-governance and self-determination, and by using it, we can more effectively prioritize problems and methods that center historically marginalized people in our communities. It is an aspiration in liberatory politic that Black folks must take up for the sake of our collective liberation, and acts on the basic notion that none of us will be free unless all of us are free. Organizing through a BQF lens is inherently collaborative and not antagonistic to other radical feminisms or liberatory politics and practices. It specifically honors Black feminist and LGBTQ liberation movements. Taking up a Black queer feminist praxis of community organizing recognizes that those who came before us and helps us see where we want to go. For some of us who organize through a Black queer feminist lens, this is solely about politics and building power. For some, our work is derived from and rooted in personal identity as a queer person or as a Black feminist, but it requires us all to have politics that value identity and lived experiences. Queer isn't simply another word for being gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Queer, as I'm defining it here, represents a continuum of possibilities outside of what are considered to be normal, sexual, or gender identities and behaviors. Affirmation of queerness creates possibility outside the norm. My good friend and comrade Jessica Bird once remarked that it was in queerness that she felt the world had endless possibilities, and in more ways than one, Blackness is inherently queer. I understand queer politics as laid out by Kathy Cohen in her article, Punks, Bulldaggers, and Welfare Queens, which holds out the radical potential for liberation for all while honoring its origins to those deemed deviant for their race, gender, and sexuality. Ultimately, using a Black queer feminist lens is a critical intervention, whether in conversations, organizing, or an envisioning movement building toward Black liberation. Those who use BQF lens oppose queer activists who espouse liberal, individualistic, and white supremacist politics, Activists who have entered movement work in the second decade of the new millennium may have missed a few things as a result of hyper-reactionary tendencies after police killings and the plethora of injustices enacted upon Black people. Far too many people have come in thinking that activism is solely about what the individual wants to do, who the individual is, and what the individual believes should be done. Our movement would benefit if each person took a moment to reflect. The work is only as strong as the people with whom we work. Lone wolves in movement work can move fast, but can only advance transformative change as far as they are connected with people. Paris Hatcher, Black feminist leader, blames the neoliberal identity politics in today's movement on white queers' presence and movement spaces, self-absorbed people who promote individualism over collective struggle. Organizing by using the Black queer feminist lens calls for us to be individuals and to work collectively with neither being at the expense of the other. What we believe to be true matters for our movements. What we believe impacts how we move in the world, what we imagine is possible, what we choose to fight for, and what we fight against. But believing in something is never enough. We must turn our beliefs into collective action. All right, so moving on to chapter 2, titled Reviving the Black Radical Imagination. She is pretty much given an explanation about the Black radical tradition, and I thought that would be pretty important for people to know, especially if we are trying to create future movements. So the Black radical tradition comprises cultural and intellectual work aimed at disrupting oppressive political, economic, and social norms, and its roots are in anti-colonial and anti-slavery efforts of centuries past. Our work builds on the legacies of the Haitian Revolution, Maroon societies in the Caribbean, Quilombos of Brazil, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and the Combahee River Collective. We are dreaming about and fighting for a world without prisons, without gender-based violence, where definitions of valuable work are transformed, and where the land we live on is liberated alongside its peoples. The formations through which we work to build this movement are diverse, and we include people within and outside of organizations, scholars and intellectuals within and outside of the academy, and community organizers. We are a movement of many leaders with a structural analysis of oppression advancing a multi-issue struggle to transform the world. Some say that today's Black liberation movement has no vision or plan, no meaningful experiences as a basis. They're skeptical of today's crop of activists and our pluralistic approach to movement building and see our activism as short-lived. Others see a movement that is both a part of a long historical tradition and the beginning of a new era. Based on my study of history and involvement in Black liberation work for more than 12 years, I'm siding with the latter. This contemporary era of the Black liberation struggle approaches the dismantling of capitalism, patriarchy, and anti-Blackness in new ways while still being grounded in earlier movements. Our work revisits the boundaries of gender and Blackness and challenges binaries of male or female, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, or straight, and transgender or cisgender. None of these binaries hold true when it comes to Black people, yet we must still confront and reconcile identities rife with contradictions. This new approach, employed over a sustained period, is grounds to validate this as a movement and not simply a moment in time. All right. So moving on to chapter 3, which is titled The Case for Reimagining the Black Radical Imagination. I have a couple excerpts from there I'd like to share with all of you, particularly around when I read earlier in Charlene's bio, she was talking about how she focuses on stories and piecing together a story to get a true history of Black liberation and what that looked like. And so she just gives a little more detail about how important these stories are for movements. I have been crafting more complete stories about Black people and our movements for Black liberation for a long time. I am now clear that my hunger for a more complete story must become a shared strategy for collective liberation. The incalculable amounts of agents for Black liberation are and were more robust than the often single story of charisma, strength, and strategies I learned as a student. Incomplete stories about the history of the struggle for Black liberation have led to ineffective solutions for our collective liberation. If the relationship between two people is one of the smallest units of movement building, then the stories we hear and share within those relationships are the springboards for action. Stories provide context, can describe and explain strategy, and can help people understand what happens in the world. People process stories and make choices based on what they conclude. Activists leverage stories to explain complex ideas. People connect to stories easier than they connect with sheer facts. Numbers become numbing. Tables and charts don't usually strike us as viscerally as stories do. And while there are so many dominant forces affirming that facts simply don't matter, stories do. Stories draw out emotions. They allow us to see, taste, and feel moments. If the stories we tell about Black people's experience of resistance and resilience are incomplete, our movements to transform them, to enact them, will be insufficient and ineffective. All right, so that was on page 44. I'm sorry, I haven't been sharing page numbers. That was on page 44. So now moving on to page 46. Still about her explanation of the importance of stories. It is counter-revolutionary to tell stories about the Black radical tradition that fail to offer critiques, lessons, and insights about how white supremacy breeds systems of gender and sexual oppression. The story of white supremacy is inherently one of gender and sexual violence. Analysis of patriarchal violence is not an adjunct, but a cornerstone for understanding why Black liberation is necessary. If a more holistic history of the Black radical tradition were valued, then the movement, strategies, and tactics would be more radical and relevant to all Black people. We not only leave stories on the table unexamined when the radical work of Black feminists and queer liberation is undervalued, we also disdain effective strategy and tactics. Our people can afford for us to leave any of our genius on the table. All right, and then the last excerpt I'm going to read from is on page 59 in the same chapter. All activists and organizers would benefit by learning from Black LGBTQ and feminist movements by prioritizing their study. There is so much to gain from the illuminating works of Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Bruce Nugent, Audre Lorde, Joseph Beam, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, Essex Hemphill, and Lorraine Hansberry. The hypervisibility of Black women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer leaders in today's struggle for Black liberation is not by happenstance. We were conjured up through generations of magic. And as in almost every childhood story or horror film you've seen, magic performed by women and outsiders is considered suspicious and dangerous and targeted with violence. I exist and I'm able to lead unapologetically because of the generations of Black feminists, prisoner rights, transgender, gay, dyke, lesbian, and queer resistance that came before me. My history is that of rebels, revolutionaries, and maroons, from the transatlantic slave through the civil rights and Black power movements, the Compton's cafeteria riot, and the Stonewall Rebellion. These examples of resistance illustrate the power of people who have come together based on shared experiences, cultures, and visions for what is possible. The intellectual labor, community organizing, and cultural labor of our ancestors and elders laid the groundwork for activists from all backgrounds today and help us understand collective liberation. Their freedom dreaming resulted in the building of movements that fought for the eradication of racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia. The words intersectionality, queer, anti-racist, and anti-capitalist roll off the tongues of so many radical Black activists. No one learns those words and what they mean on their own. Black feminists, ballroom legends, queer folks, and people who fit no binaries have done the groundwork but are taken for granted in far too many movement spaces to this day. What is common terminology and practice in social justice circles today was theorized, written about, organized around, and fought for by people whose names we may never know. What we conclude in the story of the Black radical tradition must account for these forebears without apology. The Black radical tradition includes writing and rewriting the history of our people. Let us all accept that responsibility. Record your own stories, protect your family's history. Knowing these stories is important for collective liberation. It is not the responsibility of any one person to hold all the knowledge, of course. Instead, each of us has the duty to honor our present and past while encouraging future generations to take up the work when it's their turn. Cultivating, keeping, and sharing knowledge is labor and must be valued as such. All right. So then in chapter 4, which was titled 3 Commitments, she basically is saying that people who are interested in radical movements, social movements, should consider these 3 commitments, should hold true to these 3 commitments. So I'm going to read a little bit about that. So starting on page 64. Based on my experience and research of social movements, I have found that atrophy or breakdowns within movements for Black liberation, historically and in the present, largely derive from people not seeing themselves in the work, being traumatized and not giving themselves, or not being allowed time and space to do ongoing self-work and healing. Another factor is a culture of liberalism that allows for unchecked conflict and unprincipled struggle. And so there are 3 collective commitments our movements must take up to regenerate. 1 is building many strong leaders. 2 is adopting healing justice as a core organizing value and practice. And then 3 is combating liberalism with principled struggle. So I'm going to read a little bit from each of those 3 commitments to give a little more insight about those based on the author. So under build strong leaders, towards the bottom of 67 is where I'm going to start here. Everyone interested in personal or collective pursuits for liberation must look into themselves to investigate why they come into this work. Is it because you want your children to grow up in a world different from the one you inherited? That you want to walk down streets where no one is harassed because of their perceived or actual gender identity? Because you understand that the deconstruction of poor communities miles away from your comfortable home is just an economic recession away from your own front door? Or is it simply because you see the humanity in other people despite what you've been told? All people must see themselves in the work and have something at stake. Once we recognize our self-interest, we also have to humble ourselves to understand that what is at stake for us may not be pressing for others. Black pain and violent death are center stage in kitchen table conversations in the media. Videos of a Black girl being thrown to the ground in her swimsuit, Walter Scott being gunned down while running away, and an art exhibit depicting Mike Brown's murdered body are accessible to millions. Many Black folks are walking around in perpetual states of trauma. Murders of Black trans women are coming into the consciousness of more people despite years of people resisting this violent trend. People whose lives are at stake must see themselves in the work of liberation, movements that are effective and have resources, or they will rightfully stay away. And if marginalized people are not in the movement to offer critical analysis and perspective, our movement will not succeed. All right, so the second commitment is healing justice. And I will say this is one of my favorite parts, if not my favorite part of the book, because I think a lot of us who do radical movement work or are interested in, doing work with resistance, we are focused on, the populations or the groups or the cause that we're trying to fight for, and we forget to fight for ourselves and our self-care. And so the second commitment is basically being committed to healing justice to ourselves and to our community. Okay, so at the bottom of 72 is where I'm starting. Our movement needs a complete culture shift. It is especially important for leaders dealing with trauma to check in honestly with themselves and those they trust to decide if they are able to lead. Our hurt comes out against others all too often and prevents us from doing what needs to be done. Sometimes activists have to remove themselves or scale back to take care of their physical and mental health. Movements must retrofit for this reality so that we can all show up as our best selves in our work. As feminist scholar and activist Bell Hooks writes in Sisters of the Yam, we cannot fully create effective movements for social change if individuals struggling for that change are not also self-actualized or working towards that end. When wounded individuals come together in groups to make change, our collective struggle is often undermined by all that has not been dealt with emotionally. Admittedly, this is difficult terrain. People throughout the African diaspora carry centuries of violence from colonialism, slavery, patriarchy, segregation, and economic injustice. Going back to Beth Ritchie's, quote, violence matrix, unquote, the levels of violence we face daily within our homes, communities, and society are off the charts. And there is no wall to keep this dynamic outside of our movement. If there were walls keeping out wounded people, there would be no people to do the work. So true. Melissa Harris Perry set the internet on fire in July 2017 when she declared her opposition to self-care in her piece, quote, how #squad care saved my life, unquote. She refused to, quote, accept that self-care is necessary for health and well-being, unquote, and instead argued that only through care from people with whom she's in a deep relationship can she be made well. This presented a dilemma for many activists. On one hand, we are taught and encouraged to sacrifice to no end. Our ancestors and living comrades have made sacrifices beyond what most of us today have made. Who are we to not give our lives to the movement? On the other hand, we are human. We get physically sick, and our mental health can deteriorate with the fast pace and constant demands of the work. So how can we proceed under weight of the multiple systems of oppression? Our movement should live with the tension between self-care and community care. Individual activists should commit to self-care on whatever level they are able to, and communities should commit to creating a culture of care. It does not have to be, it should not be one or the other. I love that. All right, so the third commitment was about combating liberalism through principled struggle. So I'm going to read a little bit from there. So I'm starting on the bottom of 78. It is crucial that principled struggle become a cornerstone in the Black liberation movement. It cannot be limited to paid staff members or leaders. Principled struggle is imperative for all. Struggle without principles to practice and uphold leads to breakdowns and conflict, and in some cases, death. Drama is high and on full display in the age of social media. We don't have to talk with 10 people to find out about 10 different conflicts. We can simply log into Facebook or Twitter and are guaranteed to see posts about conflicts between activists about grudges or alliances. And since we're committed to improving our lives and those of all Black people, then we need to understand that rumors and unchecked conflicts distract from our ability to carry out effective strategies. Through principled struggle, we can also address the impact of one of the greatest threats to movement building, liberalism. At face value, liberalism is a general philosophy in which liberty and equality are inherent. Sounds great, right? Unfortunately, liberalism requires no specific commitment to collective work, justice, or transformation. It's a breeding ground for indirect approaches in politics that are identity neutral, unless you're a cisgender white man. Liberalism requires no ideological struggle, and it means, if anything, moderate change so not to ruffle the feathers of too many. I've learned over years that there's no struggle without discomfort. My critique of liberalism isn't about good or bad people. One can appear to treat individuals nicely while supporting policy that kills them. Liberalism dominates discourse about progress in the United States, and our movement should combat it and advance radical agendas for the sake of our collective liberation. Okay, so now we are in chapter 5, which was titled 5 Questions. So I'm going to read a short piece from this one. So essentially what Charlene is talking about in this chapter is, there are 5 questions that people who want to be involved in radical movement should ask themselves. And so I'm just going to read just a short paragraph that introduces these 5 questions. So I'm at the top of 92. There are valuable lessons to be learned from various schools of community organizing, but there's no one correct way, certainly not mine. Centuries of Black resistance show that material conditions of our people improve thanks to the will of everyday people to take collective action on such a scale that it shocks the system. This action has included armed resistance, and it has included nonviolent civil disobedience. The tactics have varied. Everyone invested in collective liberation must answer the following questions critical to determining the health and success of our movements. Who am I? Who are my people? What do we want? What are we building? And are we ready to win? So those are 5 great questions to ask ourselves. Okay, so in the last chapter before the conclusion, Charlene basically delves deeper into her work in Chicago, especially with the BYP 100. And so chapter 6 is titled The Chicago Model. And she just puts a lot of, gives us a lot of details about the work she's done, the different causes that they worked with. And so ultimately, though, she helped to come up with a list of demands. And I thought these demands were a great example of future movements that people would like to start, including myself, and to consider when we are putting them together. So at the bottom of 130 is where I'm starting. So the struggle continues. Our work was never just about getting rid of elected officials. The system itself fails to meet the needs of all people. It was about exposing, once again, the systemic injustice Black people experience in Chicago and sharing a vision to end it. BYP 100 demands were clear, and to this day, with the exception of the demands since WAN, they haven't changed much. We demand all local, state, and federal budgets to defund the police and invest those dollars and resources into Black futures. We want reparations for chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. We want to end all profit from so-called criminal justice punishment, both public and private. We want guaranteed income for all, living wages, a federal jobs program, and freedom from discrimination for all workers. We want the labor of Black transgender and cisgender women, unseen and seen, unpaid and paid, to be valued and supported, not criminalized and marginalized. We want investments in Black communities that promote economic sustainability and eliminate the displacement of our people. All right. So now, heading into the conclusion, it was titled The Mandate. She just drops, even more gems that are important for us to know. And so I'm going to read that as a closeout. So I'm reading starting at the bottom of 138 in the conclusion, titled The Mandate. Our movement must build institutions, organizations, practices, and a movement culture that future generations can respect and love enough to continue while challenging the imperfections. A single person cannot lead a successful movement. Each of us has a role in the work of movement building and must assume that responsibility. As we amass freedoms and experience collective liberation, which I believe is possible, we cannot recycle the master's tools, systems, or thinking. The movement must commit to leadership development, healing justice, and combating liberalism through principled struggle. Community organizers and activists must interrogate who we are as individuals, who our people are, and what we are building, and we must ask if we are actually ready to win. Chicago's legacies of resistance and movement building are at the forefront of this thinking. It is my hope that Chicago can serve as one model among many to guide movement building work. Our collective struggle as Black people is both transnational and local, around the globe and within our hearts. The ongoing project of colonialism lives in each of us and manifests itself in our movement. It shows up in the promotion of disaster capitalism in response to rebuilding Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. It shows up in trials by social media and in the inadequacy of movement institutions to address structural violence and trauma. Therefore, we must take up the work of decolonialization, the process of dismantling governmental and cultural systems that control and strip nations, peoples, and groups of self-determination and sovereignty. Independence movements across the Southern Hemisphere may be the most obvious examples of decolonialization, but the process doesn't end at a declaration of independence. Breaking down what has been learned under colonialism, eradicating internalized colonialism, and disrupting and displacing those who continue to benefit from it, these projects remain long after Independence Day. Our collective imaginations must burst open in order to believe that liberation is possible. People have to feel the possibility of liberation. History in today's movement teach us that Black folks have held the line of resistance for centuries. Resistance is not new. Yet today's realities require the movement to push its growing edges, tell more complete stories, and construct more complete solutions. Colonialization affects what people think and do. From the days of extermination campaigns and the forced removal of native peoples to rule in urban, economically depressed communities, the U.S. empire has been run by corporate interests and based upon state-sanctioned violence. Still, people resist. In taking decolonialization into our work, we do not ignore the need to dismantle white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. We see a bigger picture, one including all oppressed peoples. We believe in the real possibility of abolition and building a better world. We believe that an economy that is generative, not extractive, is possible and necessary. This is a call to celebrate the inherent value of all Black people. It is a call to queer our movement practices and honor the contributions of Black feminist and LGBTQ movements to the Black radical tradition, and it is a mandate to organize. In doing so, we can make the world the place we want it to be, liberate ourselves from oppression, and create social, cultural, and political systems that are liberatory and just for all. Our movement can and will hold each of these elements, and we must succeed for the sake of collective liberation. All right, so that concludes my reading. I had a great time, and I hope all of you decide to pick up the book and read it. I believe that everybody who tuned in, you have a chance to win a free copy of the book. So congratulations to the one who wins it, and thank you so much.